today I want to talk about influencers. Now, when we're talking about influencers in today's world, we're actually generally talking about social media influencers. And something that I discovered a few weeks ago is that it's an actual job. So it's an actual thing that you can get paid to be. So you can be paid to be a social media influencer. Like, I always knew it was a thing, but I didn't realise it was an actual job. And apparently it's one of the most sought after careers of our current time. And that kind of blew my mind away a little bit because I didn't realise the magnitude of being a social media influencer. But the definition of an influencer in terms of social media influencers is this. Please, Elric. Thank you. So, an influencer is someone who has the power to affect the purchasing decisions of others because of his or her authority, knowledge, position, or relationship with his or her audience. An influencer is also someone who has a following in a distinct niche with whom he or she actively engages. And the size of the following depends on the size of his or her topic of the niche. And it also says it's important to note that these individuals are not merely marketing tools, but rather social relationship assets with which brands can collaborate to achieve their marketing objectives. So what I want to do this morning is maybe reclaim that definition a little bit and change it up a little bit and talk about what it means to be a Christian influencer. Because as Christians, we are called to influence. It's in the Word. So it's what we're called to do. And in Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 to 16, it says this, teaching about salt and light. You are the salt of the earth. But what good is salt if it has lost its flavour? Can you make it salty again? It will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless. You are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. So we're talking about salt and light. Now, what do these things do? They add something. They bring something. They enhance something. They add value to something. So when we're thinking about salt, I did a little bit of research. Salt preserves, it enhances, it adds texture, it adds flavour, and it adds colour. It also binds, and it contains essential nutrients. Now, when we're thinking about light, we know that we use light, obviously, to bring light. Like if it's dark, you turn on the light. That's pretty obvious. But we also use light to communicate, to navigate, to learn, and to explore. And it's more than what we just see with our eyes. It's also radio waves, microwaves, infrared, ultraviolet, X-rays, and even, next picture please, gamma rays. Oh, yeah. That was my funny. So, regardless of its form, light enhances our lives. Now, if I ask you to think for a second, why are you here today? Like, who influenced you to be here today? Perhaps it was your parents. Maybe your parents made you come. Perhaps it was your children. Maybe it was your significant other. Maybe it was a friend, or maybe a workmate, or maybe someone, that you met down the street and had a bit of a chat to. Somebody influenced you to be here today. So, who influenced me to be here today? How did I get to be here where I am? So firstly, I just want to say that whenever I get to stand here and talk to you and share what God's been sharing with me, I feel like it's a great privilege, and I'm blessed and honoured to be able to do that. But how did I get here? Well, you could say my husband. My husband influenced me to be here. So before we were married, my husband was a practicing Christian, if that's what you want to call it. and he brought me back to church. So you can say that my husband influenced me to be here. So big round of applause to Elwood on that.
Amen.
Perhaps you could say it was a friend who caused me or influenced me to be here. So this friend of many years, we were in a playgroup together, and they were looking for a new church, and I was sort of not really content where I was, and so we made a bit of a pact, I suppose, that, hey, we're going to come and check out this church. So we did that together, and I never left. So perhaps you could say it was that friend who influenced me to be here today. Maybe it was the Anglican minister from my hometown area of Gundawindi / Yalarbin. So this Anglican minister, he was in Gundawindi, but he also did services in Yalarbin, which is my hometown. Perhaps you could say it was a word of encouragement that he gave to me as a 17-year-old teenager who was pregnant at the time. He spoke some really encouraging words to me about God's love for me and God's plan for my life. Perhaps you could say it was a Sunday school teacher, who did lots of really fun stuff and got me involved and really wanted to know about God. Perhaps you could say it was the lady from home who ran weekend and holiday camps for kids, and she was a great follower of Jesus. Perhaps you could say it was my nan, who always made sure we had the opportunity to go to church. And I think I've shared before, but I remember as a kid in Nan's lounge room, she had the Bible and I don't know what they are, the Anglican books that they pray out of, and that they, all that kind of stuff. And I would stand up there and pretend that I was giving a sermon. So, there's, I know. So, so there's lots of people that have influenced me to be where I am today. And I'm pretty certain if you stop for a minute and maybe think about who influenced you to be where you are today, there wouldn't just be one person, it'd be many, many people. And I'm sure there's going to be many other people in our lives that are going to have that kind of influence on us. We all have the power to influence someone. So what does it take? It takes one word of encouragement, and it takes one action of generosity. And I'm not just talking about a monetary generosity. I'm talking about an action, something that you do. Perhaps, I want to say this. I want to say that the problem with our culture today is that it's all about the numbers and it's all about the platform. It's all about the size of the following. It's all about being the most visible. Who did Jesus come for? Let's read the parable of the lost sheep in Luke 15. So Jesus told them this story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go to search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. When he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbours, saying, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep." Who did Jesus come for? He came for the one. In Genesis 18, 20 to 32, we see Abraham, could maybe say Abraham influenced God in this, might be a bit of a stretch, but we'll go with it. But he was certainly negotiating with God about the fate of those in Sodom and Gomorrah. So I just want to read 20 to 32. So the Lord told Abraham, "I have heard a great outcry from Sodom and Gomorrah, because their sin is so flagrant. I am going down to see if their actions are as wicked as I have heard. If not, I want to know." The other men turned and headed towards Sodom, but the Lord remained with Abraham. Abraham approached him and said, "Will you sweep away both the righteous and the wicked? Suppose you find 50 righteous people living there in the city. Will you still sweep it away and not spare it for their sakes? Surely you wouldn't do such a thing, destroying the righteous along with the wicked? Why, you would be treating the righteous and the wicked exactly the same. Surely you wouldn't do that. Should not the judge of all the earth do what is right?" And the Lord replied, If I find 50 righteous people in Sodom, I will spare the entire city for their sake." Then Abraham spoke again. "Since I have begun, let me speak further to my Lord. Even though I am but dust and ashes, suppose there are only 45 righteous people rather than 50. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And the Lord said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 righteous people there." Then Abraham pressed his request further. "Suppose there are only 40. And the Lord replied, "I will not destroy it for the sake of 40. "Please don't be angry with my Lord," Abraham pleaded. "Let me speak. Suppose only 30 righteous people are found." And the Lord replied, "I will not destroy it if I find 30. I think we get the point. Then Abraham said, "Since I have dared to speak to the Lord, let me continue. Suppose there are only 20. And the Lord replied, "Then I will not destroy it for the sake of the 20. Finally, Abraham said, "Lord, please don't be angry with me if I speak one more time. Suppose only 10 are found." And the Lord replied, "Then I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. It is not the size of the following that counts. So who's in your sphere of influence? It isn't always obvious. Let's have a look-see. Brent, when you bought that smartphone, that device, that chosen brand, did you know it was actually, even though you think it was actually a subconscious decision based on effective product marketing?
Yeah, Brent.
So I did some research on marketing.
I'm not as smart as I think I am.
While consumers report comparing multiple competing brands and price points when evaluating a purchasing decision, consumers are most driven by unconscious urges. The biggest of these is emotion. Luxury goods target our feelings of self-worth, acceptance, and status in the world. Communication devices excite us by offering a connection to friends, family, and a broader network of people. Athletic brands inspire us by offering adventure and glory through the act of competition. Other products, such as perfume and cologne, target emotions related to love and relationships. Influence is not always obvious. Proverbs 18:21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue." You do not have to have a platform to be an influencer. You do not have to have a following to be an influencer. All you need to have influence is awareness and availability. If you make yourself available and if you remain present in your world, God will give you the opportunity to be an influencer. He honestly will. Perhaps it will be that moment you take to encourage a young mum. Perhaps it's that moment that you take to help an elderly lady or gentleman with their shopping trolley. Perhaps it's that conversation, that time you take to have with a teenager about a topic that you really have no idea what it is, you have no knowledge about it, but the fact that you took the time to be genuinely interested in them is going to make a difference. And you might even learn something new. I learned some great things about Snapchat from Holly. It was amazing. Influence isn't always obvious. Now, you may not see the harvest, but you may have planted the seed. Or maybe someone else planted the seed and you've watered it by being aware and available. It may not be obvious, but you have influence. You have the power to influence. Now, there's a common mistake I think that a lot of us make, and I'm very guilty of it. Maybe it's just me. But I often think, well, you know what, there's no way I can influence anyone else. I mean, look at me, I'm a mess. I haven't got it all together. I don't have everything figured out. There's no way I can be an influence on somebody else. But me right here speaking to you guys is proof that you don't have to have it all together for God to use you to influence someone else. The Bible. Gosh, there are tons of people in the Bible that do not have it all together. Far from it. But they are still chosen by God to influence people. And not always in the most obvious of ways. You know what? Not everybody is called to be an Abraham, a Moses, an Esther, a Paul, one of the disciples. Modern day influence is all about reach. In order to make it as an influencer, you have to extend your reach to as many people as possible. But Jesus had an entirely different and far more effective strategy when it came to influence. He focused on long-term impact. It wasn't about those quick wins and immediate popularity. In fact, we know reading through the Gospels, Jesus often discouraged publicity. Like often you'll read in the Gospels that he told whoever he just performed that miracle on, don't go and tell anybody what you've seen or what you witnessed. He didn't want that happening. How did Jesus do it then? How did he influence? If he was so, don't go and tell anybody what you've seen, how did he have influence? The one. It's very simple. He cared about the one. And in John 8, verses 1 to 11, we're going to read about one of those ones. And it's called A Woman Caught in Adultery. Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered and he sat down and taught them. As he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. "Teacher," they said to Jesus, "this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say?" They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him, but Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer, so he stood up again and said, "All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." Then he stooped down again and wrote in the dust. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." Now, unless I've got my Bible wrong, I don't think we actually ever, did this woman follow Jesus? I don't know. Did she change her whole life? We don't know. But what did Jesus do? He planted the seed. He freed that woman from condemnation. He gave her life. And he gave her the opportunity for what I call a do-over. And yet there's many others in the Gospels who are the one. And just, off the top of my head, the woman with the issue of blood, the one. The leper, the one. The lame man at the pool of Bethesda, the one. The Samaritan woman at the well, the one. Yes, Jesus certainly did have a public ministry where thousands came to see him. And the Sermon on the Mount, reportedly there were thousands of people that came to see him. But he also had those very private, inconspicuous moments with just the one. We all have the power to influence just that one. Matthew 5:16 says, "In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father." The power of redemption is not just for us. It's not just for me. It's not just for you. The power that we have as a result of Jesus dying on the cross, and as a result of us, of me, saying, "Yes, Jesus, I'm going to follow you," is not just about me. It's not just about you. As Christians, we have a higher calling. We have a greater purpose. We are to use that power to influence heaven. Influence heaven? Trish, have you gone crazy? No, I haven't. We have the power to make a difference. Christian influence is about using that power to make a difference. If I'm not going to influence somebody what's going to happen? Maybe it's my one conversation with that person that makes them be here today. Maybe it's that one encouraging word that makes them not want to go and end their life. You don't know what's going on. Use what you've got. Plant the seed. Introduce people far from Christ to the idea of Jesus. To harvest the crops where people have gone before us and planted. You and I physically get to influence heaven. We are called to influence others for the glory of God. And I want to finish this morning with one final thought. Guys, if you want to come back up. Thank you. We cannot influence from a place of isolation. Our influence comes from engagement. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's read Matthew 9, 10 to 11. Later, Matthew invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. But when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with such scum?" It's pretty harsh. Matthew's job as a tax collector made him an outsider in his own society. Now, unsurprisingly possibly, that maybe his friends, or at least his colleagues, were more tax collectors and sinners. And these people were not the type of people that religious teachers would want to associate with in this time period. Associating with them would have been disastrous for their reputations. But the influence that Jesus had on Matthew meant that he wanted to share this great news, inviting those people, those sinners, those friends, those co-workers, those colleagues, to come on the journey with them if they wanted to. He invited them to come to dinner and meet this guy that had influenced him. Why did Jesus eat with sinners and tax collectors? To associate himself, to identify himself with sinners. The whole reason he came to earth, to share the table with those who were far from him. And whilst Matthew may have thought that he was feeding Jesus, it was in fact the other way around. Jesus was giving the guests at this feast heavenly food. He was giving them his time, his spirit, his kingdom message, and his love. And in that moment, like so many other moments that we read about in the Bible, Jesus was one of them. Are you a Matthew? You might not be a Paul. You might not be an Abraham. You might not be an Esther. But are you a Matthew? Are you willing to engage with others where they are at? Are you willing to lay your judgments of others, your expectations of others aside, so that you can use the power of the resurrection to influence others for Jesus' sake?